I never thought a job could change the rhythm of your life so completely. Yet here I was, 2 years after my divorce, living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in Denver, trying to juggle the responsibilities of being a single mom and paying bills that seemed to multiply overnight. My name is Rebecca Owens, and for the past few months, I had been working the overnight shift at St. Clair's Medical Center. It was quiet work most nights, filing, checking admissions, and answering phones. But the quiet wasn't always comforting. It had a way of making you notice every creak, every hum of fluorescent lights, every distant beep from the monitors down the hall. I remember the winter of 2016 vividly. Snow was falling in steady sheets, painting the parking lot outside the hospital a dull white. I'd parked my small sedan near the staff entrance and hurried in, scarf wrapped tightly around my neck. That night, like most nights, Ethan Cole was already on his rounds. He was a night orderly, tall, lean, with a perpetual shadow of scruff on his jaw. I'd known him casually for months, enough to say hello in the hall, nod in passing. But our interactions never went beyond that. He had once asked me out shortly after I started the job, and I'd declined politely. I liked my boundaries intact, especially while raising my daughter. Ethan had changed after that. He became awkward, sometimes avoiding eye contact entirely, other times staring at people too long, lingering in the hallways as if measuring something invisible. I shrugged it off at first, convincing myself it was nothing. Hospitals attract all kinds of personalities after all. That night he stepped out for a smoke break, leaving me alone at the front desk. The corridors were silent except for the low hum of ventilation, and the only sound was the distant rolling of a janitor's cart. I organized patient forms, checked the CCTV feed, and tried to distract myself from the cold that seemed to seep into the walls. The monitors showed empty hallways, flickering lights, and occasional nurse carts moving past, but nothing alarming. When Ethan returned, I noticed a shift in him immediately. His smile was tight, too quick, like it had been rehearsed. His hands trembled slightly as he set down the stack of patient files he had carried, and his eyes avoided mine. "Everything all right?" I asked cautiously. He shrugged. "Yeah, just cold." But I could feel the tension in the air, like static before a storm. I didn't push it. Hours later, my shift ended. I slipped on my coat and stepped out into the cold air, trying to shake off the lingering unease. My apartment was only a few blocks away, but when I arrived, something made me stop dead in my tracks. The front door looked different. It had scratches, small gouges around the lock. My stomach sank. Inside, muddy footprints traced a path across the living room, toward the bedroom. My daughter was at her grandmother's that week, thank God, but the thought of what could have happened made my legs tremble. I dialed 911, my voice shaking. By the time the police arrived, I was pacing, desperate for answers. Reviewing the neighbor's security footage, my blood ran cold. There he was, Ethan. The footage showed him slipping into my apartment hours earlier, moving cautiously, sitting on my couch, standing outside my bedroom door before leaving. When the officers confronted him, Ethan insisted it was just a misunderstanding, but the chill in his stare told a different story. That morning, he was arrested. After the incident, my life changed in ways I hadn't anticipated. I quit St. Clair's, installed multiple locks, security cameras, and even considered moving, though the financial strain made it impossible. I replayed that night over and over in my mind, the way Ethan moved through my apartment, the silence that had swallowed the building, the horrifying realization that I had trusted him as just another coworker. Sleep became a foreign concept. Every creak in the floorboards, every car door slamming outside made my heart jump. Even when my daughter was back home, I couldn't shake the fear. She slept peacefully in her room while I sat in the living room, eyes glued to the monitors, imagining someone stepping through the door at any moment. My friends tried to comfort me, but nobody could understand fully. "Just take it easy," they'd say. But there's no easy after someone invades your home. I couldn't even bring myself to return to night work. The hospital became a place of dread, every hallway a reminder of what had happened. I started looking for day shifts, eventually landing a position at a small clinic where evenings ended at 6. The pay was less, the hours less convenient, but I felt safe again. But the psychological weight lingered. Simple things, like answering the door or hearing a knock, triggered anxiety. I even found myself triple-checking locks before bed. My daughter noticed my constant vigilance and would sometimes ask, "Mom, are we safe?" I would smile, trying to hide the terror beneath a veneer of calm. "Yes, baby, we're safe." But deep down, I knew the world could never feel completely safe again. Months passed, but the anxiety never fully left. Visiting my old apartment for paperwork reminded me of Ethan's intrusion. I realized that the real danger wasn't just the break-in. It was the betrayal of trust, the knowledge that someone I'd interacted with every night could harbor such darkness. I started therapy, working through the fear, learning strategies to manage panic, and slowly reclaiming control over my life. My therapist emphasized boundaries, caution, and the importance of listening to gut instincts. "You did nothing wrong," she reminded me repeatedly, "but your awareness now is a survival skill." I took those words to heart, realizing that my own instincts had sensed Ethan's instability long before the cameras caught him. I also started documenting everything: calls, notes, incidents, even small disturbances. The act of writing gave me a sense of power, a way to reclaim the narrative of my life from someone who had tried to take it from me. Eventually, I tried to re-enter a semblance of normalcy. I changed routines, made friends at my new clinic, and focused on my daughter's happiness. Slowly, I could sleep through the night without obsessively checking cameras. The healing wasn't linear. Some nights, fear would creep back, triggered by mundane events. But each day, I felt a little stronger, a little safer. I realized the experience had taught me resilience. It had shown me that trust is precious, boundaries are essential, and vigilance is a part of living safely in an unpredictable world. I learned to balance caution with daily life, never letting fear dominate my every action, but also never ignoring instincts that could protect me and my family. Years later, the memory of Ethan Cole still haunts me occasionally, but it no longer defines me. I work regular hours, spend quality time with my daughter, and maintain my security measures without letting them consume me. I've shared my story with close friends and therapy groups, warning others that danger can lurk in familiar faces. I still think about the what-ifs. What if my daughter had been home? What if I hadn't checked the door that day? But instead of succumbing to paranoia, I channel that energy into preparedness. My life, though scarred, is stronger. I've learned that safety is a practice, not a guarantee. And every time I lock the door behind me, I remind myself of something vital. Trust, yes, but with awareness. Kindness, yes, but tempered with caution. The fear may never leave completely, but survival isn't about fear. It's about action, preparation, and resilience. True safety comes not from ignoring danger, but from respecting it, setting boundaries, and trusting your instincts. Life may bring unexpected threats from those we think we know, but awareness, vigilance, and self-protection empower us to survive and reclaim control over our lives. I never thought my life would come to this. Wandering a near-empty mall at 2 a.m, headphones blasting bad 90s rock, and keeping watch over a store that had been closed for longer than anyone remembered. My name's Michael Turner, 34 years old, failed police trainee, and now a graveyard shift mall security guard in Phoenix, Arizona. I tell myself this job is temporary, but deep down, I know I'm just hiding from failure. I'd washed out of the police academy 2 years prior, anxiety attacks derailing what I thought was my life's purpose. I hadn't wanted my daughter, Lily, to see me as weak. She was 16 then, sharp, sarcastic, and fiercely independent. I pretended everything was fine, even when my low-paying security jobs left me scraping by. I wanted to protect her from disappointment, but in reality, I was running from my own. Westbrook Galleria was my latest post, a sprawling mall that had seen better days. The stores were mostly empty after 10 o'clock, and by midnight it felt like a ghost town. My assignments were standard: patrol the halls, check doors, monitor cameras. But my station was special. They called it Tartarus. The store was sealed by metal sheets, windows blacked out, a dark void in the otherwise fluorescent mall. My orders were clear: don't let anyone in, don't let anyone out. At first I thought the warnings were overblown. A closed store was just that, a closed store. But then the sound started. Muffled thumps, scratches behind the metal panels, whispers I could almost convince myself were echoes of the air conditioning. One Tuesday, curiosity got the better of me. I pried open a panel just enough to see inside. The air hit me immediately. Damp, bleach stale, heavy with dust. Rows of faceless mannequins lined the room, each tagged with initials scrawled on masking tape. BR, ST, and then, my stomach dropped. LT, Lily Turner. A cold sweat broke out across my skin. Behind the counter, the floor had been cut away to reveal a tunnel, swallowing the weak beam of my flashlight. I stepped back, hands shaking. I spent the next few nights avoiding Tartarus, sticking to the outer halls, pretending my heartbeat wasn't racing. Then came the night the teens showed up. They were loud, reckless, and clearly too curious for their own good. I cornered them near Tartarus after chasing them through the echoing hallways. One boy brandished a rusted key, insisting they just wanted to see what's inside. My blood ran cold. It matched the lock I'd seen. My brother said his friends went down there. The kid whispered, eyes wide, voice quivering, and they never came back. I clenched my jaw and shoved them out, heart hammering. That night, alone again in front of Tartarus, I realized I couldn't ignore it. Someone or something was down there, and if Lily ever crossed paths with it, I couldn't live with myself. With a flashlight in hand, I pushed the metal panel aside and stepped past the mannequins, staring into the tunnel's black maw. The air smelled of mildew and decay. A whisper tickled my ears, faint, unintelligible. I swallowed hard, feeling dread wrap around my chest. I shouldn't go. Every rational instinct screamed. But I did. I stepped down into the darkness, determined to find answers. The first steps into the tunnel were worse than I imagined. The air was thick, damp, and tasted metallic. My flashlight flickered as I descended uneven concrete steps, the shadows twisting like living things. Every instinct told me to turn back, but I couldn't. Lily's initials haunted me, as if the store itself was daring me to go further. The walls were slick with moisture, and the deeper I went, the tighter the tunnel became. I caught glimpses of old, discarded objects, shoes, scraps of paper, even broken toys. The mannequins seemed to be arranged in patterns, each facing a different angle, their blank eyes unnerving in the flashlight's glow. Whispers continued, soft and overlapping, coming from deeper within. I reached a chamber that opened wider, the tunnel forming a crooked square with the walls lined in more mannequins. Dust covered the floor, but fresh footprints marred it in places. I froze. Someone, or something, had been here recently. My hands shook as I lifted the flashlight, the beam catching on initials that made my stomach drop. Some I recognized from the local news, missing teens from over the years. What is this place? I muttered under my breath, trying to calm my panicking heart. The whispers swelled, rising to murmurs that seemed to echo off the walls. I moved carefully, flashlight trembling, each step bringing me closer to a darkness that seemed to swallow sound. The tunnel's floor sloped downward, deeper into the unknown. I hesitated, thinking of calling the police, but I didn't know what I would even say. There's a spooky mall store? It sounded ridiculous. A sound behind me, like a footstep, made me spin. The beam caught nothing, only the faceless mannequins. My pulse raced. Hello? My voice cracked. The whispering intensified, and I caught a shadow dart in the corner of my eye. Not human, not entirely. The tunnel seemed to pulse, alive with some sinister rhythm. I pressed on, descending a ladder into a larger space. The air down here was cooler, damp, smelling of mold and decay. Objects littered the floor, discarded clothes, boxes, more shoes. Mannequins were everywhere, standing in rows, their blank faces pointing toward a dark opening. I realized then that the initials weren't random. They were meant to mark people, to remind whoever, or whatever, lurked here that they had been claimed. Fear wrapped around me like a vice, but I kept moving. I couldn't turn back, not with Lily's face in my mind. I reached the edge of the black opening at the tunnel's end, hearing whispers as if hundreds of voices were coming from the darkness itself. I swallowed my terror and peered in. The void seemed endless, like it had no bottom, no walls, just darkness. I backed away slowly, heart pounding, realizing the tunnel wasn't just a basement. It was something else entirely, something the human mind didn't want to comprehend. I wanted to leave, but guilt held me rooted. If I walked away, someone could fall in, get trapped, never come back. The thought of Lily's name on one of those mannequins, her initials smeared on tape, burned my chest. Over the next week I tried to keep busy, patrolling other sections of the mall, ignoring Tartarus, but I couldn't. My dreams were filled with mannequins and whispers, and I found myself driving past the mall during the day, peering at the metal panels, heart racing. Then came another intrusion. This time a teenager broke in alone. I caught him near the store, and he carried another rusted key, just like the first. I didn't mean anything, he stammered, hands raised. I wanted to see it. Do you have any idea what you're doing? I barked. People have disappeared down there. My voice trembled. I heard things, he said, terrified. I wanted to see if it was true. The fear in his eyes mirrored my own. I escorted him out, my mind racing. I couldn't just guard Tartarus anymore. I had to explore it fully, record it, find proof, and maybe stop it before anyone else got trapped. I returned with a camera and a heavy-duty flashlight, determined to document what lay beneath Tartarus. The mannequins seemed to observe me, their faceless heads leaning subtly as I moved. Dust-covered hands, old papers, shoes. Everything suggested the tunnel had been in use for years, claiming victims quietly, methodically. I descended into the deepest chamber I'd seen, whispering Lily's name like a prayer. Shadows shifted in the corners. My camera captured faint movements I could barely see, and I realized the place had a life of its own. Whispers and cold air seemed to follow me, urging me forward. At the tunnel's end, I found a ladder descending into darkness. The air was heavy, almost suffocating. I didn't want to go, but I couldn't stop. I emerged from Tartarus hours later, trembling, with my camera full of evidence. The mall felt impossibly bright and safe compared to what I'd just faced. I handed the photos to authorities, but the tunnel was like a living maze. Each attempt to investigate failed. Walls shifted, shadows moved, openings disappeared. I quit the mall job shortly after. Years later, I still think about Tartarus. I think about curiosity and responsibility, and how close we come to danger when we ignore our instincts. I tell this story to warn others. Vigilance and protection matter. Some mysteries are better left alone, some doors never meant to be opened. I survived, but I carry the weight of what might have happened, and that weight reminds me every day to protect the people I love. Curiosity without caution can be deadly, and protecting the ones you love must come before seeking answers to mysteries that may never be understood. Courage tempered by responsibility is what keeps us alive. I didn't choose this life, but it chose me in a way. After dropping out of college at 22, I found myself working wherever I could to keep my mother's medical bills from piling higher than the rent. Northgate Shipping Depot was the only place that would take me without a degree or prior experience. The pay was lousy, the hours brutal, but it was consistent. My nights were consumed by the hum of conveyor belts, the smell of cardboard dust, and the constant echo of my own footsteps across the empty warehouse floor. Most people would call it lonely. I just called it normal. October in Cleveland had a way of gnawing at your nerves. The air was crisp, almost biting, and the night sky seemed permanently gray, like it hadn't fully decided whether it was dark or just tired. That's how it felt every time I slipped into my Northgate uniform and clocked in for the graveyard shift. I'd grab my clipboard, check the inventory sheets, and start the grind of moving packages, scanning barcodes, and checking off boxes until the fluorescent lights above me flickered from exhaustion. It was on one of these nights, about an hour into my shift, that I noticed something off. The loading bay door, one I knew had been closed tightly when I arrived, was cracked open just enough to let a thin line of cold wind snake across the floor. At first, I thought maybe it hadn't latched properly. I shut it firmly and made a mental note to report it when my manager came in. But the unease didn't go away. I felt a prickling at the back of my neck, the kind that tells you something's watching even when nothing is there. As I walked down the aisle between the shelving units, a shadow moved out of the corner of my eye. I froze. Just a box shifting, I muttered to myself. But I didn't fool my own stomach. The dread crept through my veins like ice. My eyes scanned the far end of the warehouse. Nothing. The conveyor belt clattered along its track. The only sound besides that was my own heartbeat. I shrugged and tried to focus, telling myself I'd been tired, that I was imagining things. Then I saw him. At first it was just a movement, a dark figure leaning halfway from behind a steel shelf. My mouth went dry. My first instinct was to run, but I forced myself to stay calm. Whoever it was, they weren't supposed to be here. I stepped closer, my shoes squeaking softly against the concrete floor. The figure didn't move, just watched. My pulse raced, my hands shaking as I gripped my clipboard like a shield. And then the tapping started. A slow, deliberate knock on the metal shelving. Whoever it was, they wanted me to follow. I didn't. I bolted for the back exit, my heart hammering so loud I could almost hear it in my ears over the machinery. The warehouse was enormous, but at that hour it felt like a labyrinth of steel and shadows. Every corner I turned seemed darker than the last. The tapping grew more insistent behind me, echoing across the concrete like some grotesque rhythm only I could hear. When I finally reached the parking lot, I didn't stop. My hands fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 as if the mere act of calling for help would keep him from following me out. My voice shook as I described the situation to the dispatcher, trying to sound composed when I felt anything but. The cold night air hit me, and I realized I hadn't even locked the back door behind me. My legs trembled as I glanced back at the warehouse. Police arrived within minutes, but it felt like hours. I watched from the lot as they swept the dark interior, flashlights cutting through the shadows in sweeping arcs. One officer returned, face pale under the harsh lights. "He's here," he said, nodding toward the interior, behind those crates. The man had been living in the warehouse for days. Disheveled, thin, and desperate, he had armed himself with a crowbar and had been testing the locks on every door, waiting for the moment when he could catch someone alone. It wasn't just a break-in, he'd been hunting. The thought made my stomach twist. I had been mere inches from being trapped, and for a while, I couldn't even think about how close I'd been to real danger. The aftermath left me shaken. I couldn't go back to my usual night routine. Every creak of the warehouse floors in my dreams felt like his footsteps. Every shadow seemed to lurk with intent. I changed my route, checked doors twice, and even carried a personal alarm, though I hated feeling like I was being watched everywhere. My coworkers didn't fully understand. They called it paranoia. But I knew what I had seen. I knew how close I had been to something I couldn't fight or reason with. It wasn't just the fear of a single night. It was the realization that danger often hides in plain sight. Every security flaw I'd ignored, every loose door I hadn't reported, every time I had assumed the warehouse was empty, it could have been the difference between life and death. I learned the hard way that vigilance isn't paranoia, it's survival. Weeks passed, but I never stopped being careful. I installed extra locks at my apartment, never walked to my car alone at night, and refused to go back to the warehouse for late shifts without a second person present. Some nights, I still had dreams about that man, the way he waited, the sound of tapping on metal, the thrill of him thinking he could control the situation. I realized fear doesn't go away. It just hides behind routines until it catches you off guard again. Talking about it helped a little. I told my mother and a few friends, but I never wanted to relive the night. Every time I walked past a large building, even in daylight, I felt that old paranoia creeping in, reminding me that threats often wait quietly, watching. The incident changed me in ways I couldn't have imagined. I took self-defense classes, learned more about personal security, and became more aware of my surroundings. Most importantly, I learned to trust my instincts. That night at Northgate had been a warning I almost ignored, and paying attention had saved me. Years later, I still remember the hum of the conveyor belts, the smell of cardboard, and the cold draft of the open loading bay door. I think about that man sometimes, and the thought makes my stomach tighten. But I also feel grateful. Life can throw danger at you in ways you never expect. You can't control everything, but you can control how alert you are, how you prepare, and how seriously you take the small signs. Danger often hides in plain sight, and vigilance, awareness, and trusting your instincts can be the difference between safety and disaster. Being cautious isn't paranoia, it's self-preservation. I never thought a kitchen job would change my life. Back in 2008, I was 22, broke, and desperate for something steady. My mother had been doing her best since Dad walked out when I was 14, but most of the weight had fallen on me. I had a younger brother, Caleb, still in high school then, and I swore I'd help him get further than I did. College was slow going. I was taking night classes at the community college, barely scraping by with part-time work. When I landed a spot as a line cook at the Harbor House, a popular seafood joint on the river in Savannah, I felt like I'd won the lottery. It wasn't glamorous, sweat, grease burns, and 12-hour shifts, but it paid better than retail. And more importantly, it made me feel useful. I remember the first night, the hiss of frying shrimp, the clang of pans, the constant chorus of, "Order up." My nerves were shot, but I found a rhythm. The head chef, Alonzo, barked orders like a drill sergeant, but when he slapped my shoulder at the end of the shift and said, "Not bad, new kid," I felt like I belonged. Over the months, I earned respect. The waitstaff learned I could keep up no matter how busy the Friday night rush got. The dishwashers liked me because I tipped them out of my own pocket when they helped me scrub down my station. Even the older cooks, men who'd been in kitchens longer than I'd been alive, gave me a nod now and then. For a guy who'd grown up feeling invisible in his own house, that meant everything. By spring, things were finally settling. I balanced school and work, and I even had a girlfriend, Emily, who I'd met in my sociology class. We'd been dating 6 months, and though we weren't living together, she came by often enough that Caleb teased me about it whenever she drove me home. For once, life felt like it was moving forward. Then Ryan Blake walked into the restaurant. He was hired as a bartender, tall, sharp-featured, with this easy grin that made people instantly relax. Customers loved him, staff loved him, even Alonzo cracked a smile when Ryan told a joke during a break. At first, I thought nothing of it. I was too busy flipping scallops and burning my forearms to care about a new hire. But it didn't take long before I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. Ryan looked like me. Not exactly, but enough that people started commenting. He had the same messy dark hair, the same build, even the same lazy way of leaning against the counter when we were tired. At first, it was a running joke among the servers. "Hey, Mark, you're twins here," they'd say when he walked by. He played into it, grinning, sometimes mimicking my walk or repeating my phrases. I laughed it off. Kitchens are rough places. You tease or you get teased. But soon it wasn't just jokes. He started copying my slang, the little things I'd say without thinking. I caught him telling the same joke I'd made earlier in the shift, word for word, to a waitress. When she laughed, he looked over at me like he was checking to see if I noticed. I brushed it off. Savannah was full of guys with dark hair and scruffy faces. Maybe it was coincidence. Still, when I went home at night, I couldn't shake the thought of how his smirk felt too familiar, like I was watching a warped version of myself. And deep down, a voice whispered that he wasn't just imitating me, he was trying to become me. It escalated in ways I didn't expect. A week after Ryan started, I overheard him telling a couple at the bar about his brother Caleb, how he was helping him pay for school. I froze mid-step, holding a tray of clean plates. That was my story, word for word. I confronted him later out back near the dumpsters where we took smoke breaks. "Why'd you tell them that stuff about Caleb?" I asked. Ryan lit a cigarette, took a drag, and squinted at me like I was overreacting. "Just talking, man. Customers eat that Family Guy stuff up. Makes better tips." "That's my life, not yours," I snapped. He shrugged. "Relax. Nobody cares." But I cared. And when the servers started mixing us up, I cared even more. They'd call me Ryan and him Mark in the rush, and he'd grin like it was funny. I hated it. I'd worked months to carve out a place in that kitchen to stop feeling like a ghost, and suddenly, this guy was blurring the lines. It didn't stop there. Emily called me one night, upset. "Why did you text me about my dress tonight?" she asked. I was confused. "I didn't. You said you loved the red one, said I should wear it next time we go out." I swore I hadn't touched my phone during the shift. When she forwarded the text, my stomach dropped. The number wasn't mine. It was Ryan's, but he'd signed it M. I confronted him the next day in the walk-in cooler. The cold air fogged around us as I slammed the door shut. "Stay the hell away from my girlfriend." Ryan just smiled, setting down a tray of lemons. She didn't seem to mind. I shoved him hard against the shelves. "I'm serious. Don't ever text her again." He stared at me, unblinking, then smirked. "We're not that different, Mark. Maybe she won't notice." For the first time, I felt something darker beneath his grin. Not just mischief, something predatory, like he enjoyed twisting the knife. After that, I couldn't relax. I started double-checking my locker, keeping my phone in my pocket at all times, even changing my passwords. Still, I caught him watching me in the kitchen. When I laughed with a coworker, he'd mimic the same laugh 2 minutes later. When I leaned on the counter, he mirrored me across the line. It was like working beside my shadow. The worst was when a server pulled me aside during a Friday night rush. "Hey, Mark," she whispered. "Why'd you tell Table 6 you were a line cook? You're off tonight, right?" My blood went cold. I wasn't off. I was on the line, plating dishes, which meant Ryan had introduced himself as me. That night, as I scrubbed down the grill, I knew this wasn't a joke anymore. It wasn't about tips or messing around. Ryan wasn't just copying me. He was replacing me. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. I'd stayed late to help the dishwashers finish up. By the time I clocked out, the dining room was dark, chairs stacked on tables. I headed to the back to grab my jacket from my locker. When I opened it, my heart stopped. Ryan was there, standing in front of my open locker, wearing my spare jacket. He turned slowly, grinning. "It looks better on me." I yanked it off his shoulders. "What the hell is wrong with you?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Maybe I just see myself in you, or maybe you're the version of me that got stuck in the wrong life." I shoved him hard, the metal lockers rattling. "Stay the hell out of my stuff, and stay away from Emily." For a moment, his grin slipped. His eyes went flat, cold. "You think this life belongs to you? But it doesn't." I stormed out before I did something worse. The next morning, Ryan didn't show up for his shift. Or the next. By the third day, Alonzo muttered something about him quitting without notice. His apron was left behind, stained and tossed in the corner like garbage. Everyone moved on. The staff joked about how flaky bartenders always were. I tried to move on too, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. At school, I started catching glimpses. A figure on the other side of the street wearing a jacket just like mine. A reflection in a cafe window that looked too familiar, even when I turned and no one was there. Emily swore she saw someone outside her apartment one night, standing under the streetlight smoking. Then came the text. "You're with the wrong Mark." Emily showed me her phone, her hands trembling. The number was blocked, but I knew it was him. I tried to explain it to my friends, to Emily, even to Caleb. Nobody understood. They told me Ryan was gone, that he'd moved on, that I was paranoid. Maybe I was. But I couldn't ignore the way the hair on the back of my neck stood up whenever I walked home alone. One night after closing, I cut through an alley to the bus stop. My footsteps echoed against the brick walls. Then I heard another set, just slightly behind mine. "Ryan?" I called, though my voice cracked. No answer. But I swear I heard a laugh, low and familiar. I ran all the way to the stop. When the bus doors opened, I nearly collapsed into a seat. Out the window I saw him, or someone who looked like him, standing in the shadows. He didn't move. He just watched. I didn't sleep that night. Emily begged me to quit the harbor house, but I couldn't. I needed the money for tuition and for Caleb, so I stayed. But I became paranoid. I checked every corner of the kitchen, every reflection in the glass doors. Sometimes I thought I saw him in the crowd at the bar, grinning at me from the back. Other times I thought I heard his voice calling my name in the middle of the rush. The worst part? A small, terrifying part of me wondered if maybe he was right. Maybe he wasn't copying me. Maybe he really was me. Or the version of me I could have been if things had gone differently. Charismatic, confident, smiling like he owned every room he walked into. And maybe he wasn't gone at all. Maybe he was waiting. By the end of that year, I couldn't take it anymore. I quit the harbor house and picked up shifts at a smaller cafe near campus. It paid less, but it was quiet, and I could breathe again. But Ryan never fully disappeared. Emily dumped me after another text came through, the same blocked number. She said she couldn't live in the middle of a ghost story. I didn't blame her. Caleb stopped asking about it too, probably thinking I'd lost my mind. Still, every once in a while, I see him. A man across the street with my walk. A grin in the crowd that looks too much like mine. A reflection in the mirror that lingers a second too long. I've learned to live with it, to keep moving. But some nights, when I wake up sweating, I wonder if Ryan ever existed at all. Or if he was just the part of me I'd buried, crawling back into the light. And the scariest thought of all, maybe he's still out there, waiting for the right moment. Never ignore the small warnings when someone crosses boundaries. People who want to take your place, whether in work, relationships, or life itself, don't usually come with a warning label. They start small, borrowing your habits, your stories, even your name, until you don't recognize yourself anymore. Protect your identity, your space, and your relationships. If someone is determined to take what's yours, distance isn't cowardice, it's survival. Back in 2012, I was 20 years old and carrying more weight than I knew how to handle. My parents were still reeling from the recession. My dad had been laid off from a factory job he'd held since before I was born, and my mom's part-time hours at the grocery store barely stretched to cover gas and heat. I was a sophomore at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and while my tuition was mostly covered through loans and grants, I worked every hour I could find to keep myself afloat. I sent home whatever I could, $20 here, $50 there. It wasn't much, but when your folks are eating cereal for dinner, even that matters. That's how I ended up at Brightmart, the massive 24-hour retail store out on East Washington. I'd seen the glowing yellow sign every night driving home from class, a place so big it felt like a city block swallowed whole. They were always hiring, and after a quick interview, I was slotted onto the overnight shift. Midnight to 8 in the morning. The kind of hours that make your body ache in ways you don't expect until you live them. The nights were long and strange. The store had a hum to it, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, coolers droning like faraway engines. Half the lights were shut off after 10 to save electricity, which left these yawning aisles stretching into dim shadows. You'd see the occasional insomniac pushing a cart, or the lonely regulars who treated Brightmart like a second home. But mostly it was empty space and silence. I manned the front register. It wasn't busy work. Sometimes I wouldn't scan a single item for an hour. But I was supposed to greet customers, watch for shoplifters, and answer the phone. Most of the time I fought off sleep, staring at the wall of candy bars across from me. I'd read textbooks when the managers weren't around, highlighter tucked in the drawer. Rob Jensen was the night manager. He was a broad-shouldered guy with a permanent 5 o'clock shadow, and the kind of voice that carried through aisles without him trying. Rob had worked at Brightmart forever, or at least it felt that way. He kept things steady, joking with us, bringing coffee around when we started to fade. Without him, the nights would have been unbearable. I told myself the job was just temporary. 1 year, maybe 2, then I'd graduate and find something better. That promise kept me from sinking into the fluorescent haze. I thought I knew what lonely felt like before Brightmart, but nothing compared to standing at a register at 3 a.m., watching shadows move through aisles and wondering if you were the only person awake in the whole world. It was during one of those nights, in the dead of January, that I first noticed him. A bald man, heavyset, carrying a ring of keys that jingled as he paced up and down the aisles. He had a black bag slung over his shoulder, and he kept looking my way, not browsing, not shopping, just circling. At first I assumed he was staff, maybe maintenance, maybe a manager I hadn't met. But the longer I watched him, the colder the pit in my stomach grew. Something about the way he moved didn't fit. He wasn't stocking. He wasn't helping customers. He was just watching. When he finally approached my register, I braced myself. He didn't smile, not at first. Then suddenly he did, wide and firm, like someone slipping on a mask. He extended his hand. "Go on back to the warehouse," he said in a low, confident tone. "I'll watch the front." And like a fool, I believed him. I should have questioned it. Should have asked for his badge, his vest, his name. But exhaustion does strange things. When you've been awake all day with classes and then work, your brain clings to shortcuts. A man with keys, a bag, and authority in his voice? Sure. Manager. I shook his hand, nodded, and headed toward the back. I remember thinking how relieved I was. The warehouse was quieter, and sometimes if you hung around there you could catch a break from customers. But when I pushed through the swinging door, I nearly collided with Rob. He was carrying a clipboard, Brightmart vest zipped up, his badge clipped at his chest. He looked at me with confusion. "What are you doing back here?" I stammered. "The manager told me to come back, said he'd cover the front." Rob frowned. "What manager?" "The bald guy," I said. "Keys. Black bag. He said he'd take over for me." Rob's expression shifted in a way that made my skin prickle. He set down the clipboard. "I don't know who the hell you talked to, but it wasn't me. There's no other manager on tonight." Before I could respond, the store went dark. Not dim, pitch black. Every light cut out at once, the hum of the coolers the only sound left. The silence was so sudden it pressed on my eardrums. Rob swore under his breath. "Stay here," he muttered, and grabbed the flashlight from his belt. He headed toward the floor, the beam of light bobbing as he moved. I stood frozen, heart hammering. Then came the sound. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Not Rob's. "Hey, kid." The voice carried through the dark, calm and steady. "You back here?" My blood went cold. It was him, the man with the keys. I dropped into a crouch, moving toward the emergency exit. My fingers fumbled at the handle, but it wouldn't budge, locked. Of course it was. My breaths came sharp and shallow. The jingling of keys echoed closer, steady, taunting. "Don't hide," he called. "Just want to talk." I pressed my back to the door, praying for it to open, praying for Rob to come back. The sound of those footsteps felt like they were inside my chest. And then, just when I thought I was cornered, Rob's hand shot into the beam of light. He unlocked the door with his own keys, grabbed my arm, and whispered, "Run." We bolted into the icy night, breath steaming in the frozen air, the metal door slamming behind us. My legs felt like rubber, but we didn't stop until we reached Rob's car. Only then did I realize how close I'd been to being trapped. The police arrived within minutes. Rob called them from his phone while I sat shivering in the passenger seat, my teeth chattering not just from the cold but from the adrenaline. Squad cars pulled into the lot, their lights flashing blue against the snowbanks. Officers swept through the store with flashlights, their radios crackling. One of them, a tall guy with a trimmed beard, came over to take our statements. "Describe him," he said, pen poised over his notepad. "Bald," I stammered. "40s, maybe. Heavy set. He had this bag and a big ring of keys, like he belonged there." The officer exchanged a look with Rob. "Keys?" "Yeah," I said. "That's how he convinced me. He had them jingling the whole time." Rob crossed his arms. "Our employees' keys are accounted for. I checked the cabinet myself. So either he stole them, or he's been watching long enough to know how to fake it." That word, watching, sat like ice in my stomach. They didn't find him that night. The footage told the story, though. My supervisor showed me the recording later that week. The man appeared on camera, moving with confidence. He went to the breaker box, pulled the power, then walked calmly through the aisles. At one point, he stopped near the warehouse door, tilting his head as if listening. Then he walked toward where I'd been hiding. The detective said he might have been a burglar, maybe someone with experience in security, maybe even a disgruntled ex-employee. But none of that explained the way he looked at me, the way his voice carried when he called out, like he knew me, like I was the reason he was there. For weeks I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the beam of Rob's flashlight, the darkness pressing in, the sound of keys jingling closer and closer. I started checking the locks on my apartment door 3 times before bed. Sometimes I'd wake up convinced someone was standing outside. Emily, my girlfriend at the time, told me I was being paranoid. "He's gone," she said. "The police are looking. You're safe." But I didn't feel safe. Not at Brightmart. Not at home. Not anywhere. I stayed at the job because I needed the money, but I refused any more overnight shifts. I traded with coworkers, begged for afternoons or evenings. I'd rather deal with the chaos of crowds than the suffocating quiet of the graveyard shift. Still, every now and then, a thought would sneak in. What if Rob hadn't been there? What if he'd gone to the warehouse 5 minutes later? The man had locked the exits. He'd cut the power. He'd known exactly where to move, and I would have been alone. That thought kept me awake more nights than I cared to admit. By the end of the year, I left Brightmart. I found another job on campus, tutoring freshmen in English comp. The pay wasn't great, but it kept me away from the fluorescent tomb of that store. Still, the memory followed me. I couldn't shake the sound of his voice, the calm certainty in it. "Hey, kid, you back here?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement, like he already knew I was. The cops never found him. No fingerprints, no ID, nothing. Just a grainy image of a bald man with keys walking out the side door into the night. Sometimes when I'm out late, I'll see someone in the corner of a parking lot, jingling keys, standing too still. My chest tightens, and I'm back there in the dark, praying the door will open. I don't know if he was a thief, a predator, or something worse. All I know is that he was real enough to shake my sense of safety to the core. And the truth that still unsettles me most is this. The scariest danger that night wasn't waiting outside in the shadows. It was standing right in front of my register, smiling, holding the keys. Not everyone who acts like they belongs. Authority can be faked. Confidence can be staged. And sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who slip past your doubts by looking like they're in charge. I learned to trust my instincts, to ask questions, to never hand over responsibility just because someone sounds sure of themselves. Safety isn't about being paranoid, it's about respecting that little voice in your head when it whispers, something's not right. Long before everything came apart, I used to think of myself as dependable. My name is Ethan Miller, and in the fall of 2022, I was 29 years old, living alone in a modest one-bedroom apartment in Portland, Oregon. I wasn't special in any remarkable sense. I worked long hours at Nimbus Tech Solutions, a mid-sized software company tucked into an office park surrounded by coffee shops and parking garages. My days were repetitive, my nights uneventful. If I wasn't at the office, I was either watching late-night reruns, scrolling my phone, or half-heartedly cooking whatever I could throw together from Trader Joe's. I had always been the type who stayed late at work. Not because I loved the job. It was mostly debugging code and writing documentation, but because I feared falling behind. The thought of letting someone down, of missing deadlines, ate at me. My manager, Laura, once told me, "Ethan, you're one of the reliable ones. We can count on you." Those words kept me chained to my desk, long after the rest of my team had gone home. It was during those long evenings that I first noticed Julian. He was new, younger than me by a couple years, with neatly combed dark hair and a way of smiling that always seemed a little too rehearsed. At first, I admired his work ethic. He stayed late, like I did. He mumbled something about testing servers and double-checking backups. His desk was at the far end of the row, a dim corner where only one fluorescent light worked properly. I didn't think much of it. If anything, I was glad someone else understood what it meant to work hard. The first real unease crept in on a rainy Thursday night. I had left my laptop charger behind and drove back around 8. The building was quiet, the kind of quiet that buzzes in your ears. I swiped in, pushed open the glass door, and froze. Julian was there, sitting in the corner, his face lit only by the glow of his monitor. His desk was buried under a chaotic sprawl of sticky notes, USB drives, and half-drunk coffee cups. He wasn't typing. He was whispering. "Julian?" I asked, my voice startling in the stillness. He jerked his head up and smiled almost sheepishly. "Just making sure every possibility is covered," he said, tapping a ring of office keys against the desk. "One for every version of this place." I laughed nervously, not sure if he was joking. "Man, you're dedicated." "Better safe than sorry," he murmured, his eyes darting back to the screen. I grabbed my charger and left, but the unease followed me home like a shadow. That night, as I lay in bed listening to rain drum against the window, I replayed his words over and over. One for every version of this place. The following week, little things began to go wrong. At first, they seemed like ordinary mistakes. A few lines of code in our project repository had been rewritten without explanation. An email with a draft proposal was sent from my account to half the team, though I never wrote it. When I mentioned it to Laura, she frowned. "Ethan, maybe you're just overworked. Take a night off." I nodded, but the words didn't sit right. I wasn't careless. I never had been. Julian's presence only made it stranger. Every time I passed his desk, he seemed to shrink back, muttering under his breath. Once I caught him scribbling diagrams on sticky notes, loops and arrows, numbers scattered like code fragments, circles drawn around phrases I couldn't understand. When I asked about it, he covered the notes with his arm and chuckled. Just keeping track of possibilities. Possibilities. That word again. It wasn't just work, though. At home, I started misplacing things. My wallet would end up in the freezer, my keys on the bathroom sink. Twice I woke up to find my laptop open on the kitchen table, files scattered across the screen. I lived alone. One night, determined to get answers, I stayed later than usual. Around 11, I heard footsteps in the hall behind me. I turned, expecting Julian, but the corridor was empty. The sound came again, measured, deliberate. My pulse quickened. "Julian?" I called. No answer. The lights flickered. I stuffed my things into my bag and tried the exit, but the door jammed. My palms grew damp as I shoved harder, but it wouldn't budge. The footsteps returned, closer this time. I spun, heart racing, and swore I saw a shadow at the end of the hall, tall and narrow, watching. I bolted up the stairs, phone in hand, desperate for reception on the rooftop. As I pushed open the heavy door, I froze. Below, from somewhere inside the office, a voice echoed up through the stairwell. My own voice, whispering passwords I didn't remember saying aloud. The next day I told myself I had imagined it. Stress, lack of sleep, anything but the truth. But when I returned to the office, Laura pulled me aside. "Ethan, did you come in around midnight last night?" "No. Why?" She sighed and showed me a printout from security. The building logs recorded your badge being used twice, once at 8:15, then again at midnight. I stared at the page. "That's impossible." I went home. "Look, I don't know what's going on, but you need rest. You're not yourself." "Not myself." The words stung. That evening, I sat at Julian's desk while he was away, flipping through the mess. The sticky notes weren't random. They were sequences of letters and numbers, my passwords, drawings of floor plans, timelines with my initials marked on them. I felt my stomach drop. "Ethan." I flinched. Julian stood in the doorway, smiling faintly. "You shouldn't dig too deep." "What is this?" I demanded. He tilted his head almost tenderly. "You'll see. It's all you anyway." I shoved past him, unsettled, but his words burrowed into me. "All you." That night I dreamed of him, sitting at my desk, using my hands, speaking in my voice. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Every evening blurred into a haze of whispers and flickering lights. Files kept shifting. Coworkers grew wary. Marcus, one of the developers, stopped me in the break room. "Hey man, no offense, but you've been off lately, like sending weird emails. You okay?" "I didn't send them," I insisted. He raised an eyebrow. "Then who did?" "Julian." It had to be Julian. But when I mentioned his name, Marcus frowned. "Who?" "The new guy. Dark hair, corner desk." "There's no Julian here, Ethan." I froze. That night I marched straight to the security office. The guard on duty, a stocky man named Glenn, pulled up the footage. We scrubbed through hours of tape. My stomach clenched as I watched myself pacing the office, muttering, moving USB drives, plastering sticky notes on walls. Alone. "Looks like you've been burning the midnight oil," Glenn said casually. My mouth was dry. "No, there should be someone else. Another guy." Glenn shook his head. "It's just you." When I got home, I locked every door, turned on every light, and sat at the kitchen table with my head in my hands. If Julian didn't exist, then who had I been talking to? The answer was terrifying in its simplicity. Julian was me. Once the realization took root, it grew like mold, spreading into every corner of my life. Julian wasn't a coworker. He was the part of me I had buried under deadlines, caffeine, and fear of failure. He was the voice that whispered late at night, the shadow I chased down hallways. He was every mistake, every slip, every password I didn't remember typing. I tried to tell Laura, but the words came out broken. "I think I've been doing things without knowing." Her face softened. "Ethan, you need help. Real help." I nodded, though I wasn't sure what that meant. Therapy, medication, time away. None of it seemed enough to banish Julian. Weeks passed. I stopped staying late, but the damage was done. At home, I still caught glimpses out of the corner of my eye, a shadow shifting near the window, a whisper in my own voice from the empty hallway. I knew Julian wasn't real, but knowing didn't make him disappear. One night I woke at 3 a.m. to find sticky notes scattered across my desk. They were written in my handwriting, each bearing the same phrase: "Every possibility is covered." I sat down, staring at the words until sunrise. Even now, years later, I wonder if Julian ever truly left, or if he's waiting in some quiet corner of my mind, patient as ever, ready to take the reins again. No matter how strong we think we are, unaddressed stress and isolation can fracture the mind in ways we don't see until it's too late. The story of Julian wasn't about a haunting. It was about neglecting myself until part of me broke away and tried to survive on its own. The lesson is simple but easy to ignore. Take care of your mind as much as your work. Because if you don't, the cost might be a version of yourself you can't control. I never thought working nights could change your life or scare you in ways you can't shake. Growing up in Tacoma, Washington, I was the kind of kid who preferred quiet nights, sketching in my bedroom while my parents watched late-night TV. College life was expensive, and by the summer of 2020, I knew I had to find a job to help pay tuition. I stumbled upon a posting for Midnight Bites Diner, a 24-hour joint in Seattle, and something about the night shift appealed to me. The city felt different at night, almost intimate in its emptiness. I wanted to be a part of that, even if it meant working alone for hours. On my first day, I walked through the diner's doors at 10 p.m., my backpack slung over my shoulder, heart racing. The neon lights hummed faintly, flickering in the corners, and the smell of grease and coffee made my stomach tighten with both excitement and nerves. The few customers lingering in booths glanced up briefly before returning to their quiet conversations or phones. My manager, a woman named Karen, introduced me to my night shift partner, Damien. He was tall, his dark hair messy, eyes sharp in a way that made you feel like he noticed things other people wouldn't. "First night?" he asked, offering a hand. His grip was firm, almost calculated. "Yeah," I said, trying to match his easy smile. "I'm Lila." "Damien," he replied. "Don't worry. Nights are easier once you get used to the rhythm. You see things most people never notice." I laughed, thinking he meant the quiet beauty of late-night diners, the hum of refrigeration, the distant sound of tires on wet asphalt. At first, Damien was funny, helpful, and engaging. He showed me shortcuts for cleaning the tables, how to handle demanding truck drivers, and where to hide when the diner got too loud for the quiet I craved. We talked about video games, music, and movies. But something in his smile sometimes didn't reach his eyes, like there was a layer of calculation beneath the charm. By the end of my first week, I began noticing subtle things. He would casually mention fights he had been in, describing violent encounters with almost gleeful nonchalance. "I don't like leaving a mess," he said once, shrugging as if it were a recipe rather than a warning. I laughed nervously, telling myself I was reading too much into it. The city at night was unpredictable, sure, but Damien's presence made me uneasy in a way I couldn't define yet. Still, the routine of the night shift was comforting. The diner was almost empty at 1 a.m., the hum of the coffee machine and fryers filling the silence. I liked that. I liked the anonymity, the steady rhythm, and the brief conversations with truck drivers who only wanted a hot meal and a story from someone awake at this hour. Nights were quiet, almost serene, until they weren't. It started subtly, the shift from harmless oddity to something darker. Damien began asking me to accompany him on walks to clear the night air after closing, insisting it was part of keeping the diner safe. He would glance at the empty streets, muttering about things that hide when people aren't paying attention. At first, I laughed it off, thinking he was joking, but the tightness in his expression never matched the humor in his voice. One night we were stacking dishes after a long rush of early morning truck drivers. Damien leaned against the counter, eyes scanning the street outside the window. "You ever think about what people would do if no one was watching?" he asked casually, almost conversationally. "What do you mean?" I replied, unsure. "Stuff people regret, or worse. Some people can't control it." He shrugged, smirking. I felt my stomach twist, but I forced a laugh. He chuckled along, but it didn't reach his eyes. That same week, he told me a story about a fight he'd had with a stranger outside a bar. At first, it seemed like a tale of bravado, but the details, how close he had come to hurting someone, the way he smiled while describing it, made my laugh sound hollow, even to my own ears. The true moment of fear came a few nights later. Damien coaxed me into walking with him to a nearby corner, just a block from the diner. He started testing me, provoking a delivery man with words and gestures, escalating tension until the man's hand twitched toward a pocket. My heart froze when the man suddenly pulled a concealed weapon. Damien yelped and staggered backward, a cut forming above his eye. I felt numb. One wrong moment and it could have been fatal. I called 911 that night, shaking and barely coherent, explaining everything to the dispatcher. When Damien found out, he didn't plead or argue. He vanished. Just like that, the person I had been cautiously trusting disappeared, leaving me with the residue of panic, confusion, and a growing awareness of just how thin the line between ordinary and dangerous can be. Even after he left, the streets felt different. Shadows seemed to linger longer. Shapes moved where there shouldn't have been shapes, and I realized how much I had depended on routine, on ignoring small alarms in favor of convenience. That night, I understood that danger doesn't always arrive with a warning siren. Sometimes it walks quietly beside you. Weeks passed, and I returned to the night shift alone. Damien was gone, but the tension he left behind lingered like smoke. I became hyper-aware, noticing every figure lingering outside, every unusual sound in the diner. Truck drivers commented on how attentive I had become. I smiled politely but didn't explain why I flinched at footsteps outside or why my hands shook when I opened the door to let someone in. One Thursday, a man lingered at the counter for longer than usual. His eyes seemed too focused on me, following my movements with an intensity that made my stomach knot. I kept conversation neutral, handing him his coffee with polite smiles, forcing normalcy. By the time he left, I realized I'd been holding my breath. My awareness of what could happen was now permanent, and I hated it. Late nights became exercises in careful observation. I noticed the way Damien had watched reactions, how he gauged fear, how easy it had been for him to manipulate. I studied strangers' movements, voices, and expressions, as if preparing for some invisible threat. It wasn't paranoia, it was survival. I found solace in small things, labeling the silverware correctly, keeping the coffee pot warm, checking the locks on the diner's doors, and silently acknowledging that the streets outside were not always safe. I began texting my parents when I left, just to hear a familiar voice, and I started jogging home in pairs with other night workers whenever possible. And sometimes, just sometimes, I felt the shadows shift behind the neon glow outside the diner's windows. Every creak of tires or scrape of a boot reminded me of Damien, of how close I had come to disaster, and how careful one had to be in trusting appearances. By the time fall rolled around, I had settled into a rhythm, though the tension never fully lifted. I had learned to trust my instincts above all else, a lesson etched into every corner of my mind. Customers noticed my composure, but I could feel every sudden movement, every loud shout, every figure appearing in peripheral vision like a warning bell. One night a colleague mentioned Damien. He disappeared, right? Nobody knows where he went? I nodded stiffly. Yeah, just gone. I didn't explain the fear, the ways he had lingered in my memory, in the way the dark streets whispered. I didn't explain how I sometimes rehearsed escape routes from the diner, imagining scenarios where quick thinking and courage would save me. I had no desire to relive those nights in conversation. The experience had taught me a harsh lesson about appearances, trust, and vigilance. I began documenting small incidents in a journal, things I noticed outside the diner, minor threats, unusual behavior from patrons. It wasn't paranoia, it was strategy, a map of survival. I knew that being cautious didn't make me weak. It made me aware, prepared, and alive. The diner became a training ground, and I grew resilient. My college friends noticed I was quieter, more observant, more cautious, but they didn't understand why. Some things I realized weren't meant to be shared. They were lessons learned firsthand. The final weeks of my shift were marked by reflection. I watched the city at night with new eyes, aware of vulnerability and yet grateful for survival. Every neon light, every hum of tires, every distant siren reminded me of nights I had spent fearing shadows and the people who hide behind friendly smiles. I had escaped danger, but I carried its memory with me, a quiet vigilance that had become part of who I was. Eventually, Damien never returned, and the diner nights became routine again. I still saw shadows on empty streets, glimpses of movement, reminders of the past. But I also knew that I had learned something invaluable. Instincts are stronger than hope. Awareness is more reliable than appearances, and courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it. I quit the diner a semester later, moving on to a safer summer job, but the lesson stayed. I had survived, and survival came with a price. A constant awareness, a wariness that never truly fades, and a respect for the quiet danger in the world. Life often presents danger in subtle, familiar forms. Trust your instincts, observe carefully, and never underestimate the ordinary people or circumstances around you. Awareness and courage are the true shields against harm, and surviving close encounters requires vigilance, quick thinking, and respect for your own safety. I didn't plan on working nights forever, but life has a way of forcing practicality on you. After leaving the military, I expected stability, but civilian life was quieter, lonelier, and strangely more exhausting than active duty. My medical training kept me sharp, but bills and rent piled up fast in Denver, especially after my brother moved in for a while and my savings evaporated. When I saw a posting for a night security guard at Chaoyang Skyline Corporate Center, I didn't hesitate. It promised steady pay, late hours, and minimal oversight. The first night I walked through the lobby, the fluorescent lights flickering faintly overhead, I felt a mix of anticipation and unease. Skyline was a glass and steel behemoth, 20 floors of offices, conference rooms, and storage areas, usually buzzing with daytime activity but eerily hollow at night. The elevator hum, the distant hum of HVAC systems, and the occasional flicker of a monitor were my only companions. My uniform felt heavy and oddly reassuring, the radio clipped to my belt a lifeline to the world beyond these walls. My manager introduced me to Owen, my shift partner. He was tall, broad-shouldered, covered in tattoos from wrists to elbows, and wore a stoic expression that didn't change. "I don't talk much," he said when I tried to make conversation, "but I watch things. You'll get used to it." There was something confident about him, and in a way that reassured me. I'd learned in the military that competence often comes without smiles. The first few nights were quiet, almost deceptively so. I memorized the camera feeds, learned the stairwell routes, and patrolled empty hallways with my flashlight cutting swaths of yellow through the shadows. Owen stuck close enough to appear as backup, but he often lingered near doors or corners longer than necessary. I chalked it up to habit, a veteran's way of observing. It wasn't until the second week that I noticed something strange. Around 1:30 a.m., while checking the loading dock, I caught sight of two men loitering near the rear entrance. They weren't wearing uniforms or carrying delivery packages. They moved with a purpose, glancing around and speaking in low tones I couldn't make out. I motioned to Owen, expecting him to confront them. Instead, he waved casually. "Just delivery guys," he said. "Nothing to worry about." Something in me tensed anyway. Military training doesn't leave you. It only goes dormant. I scribbled the encounter in a small notebook I carried, labeling it odd but unconfirmed. Over the next few nights they appeared again, always around the same hour, always lingering just long enough to set my nerves on edge. Owen didn't mention them, didn't acknowledge anything unusual. His silence was becoming louder than words, a warning I couldn't fully place. The unease grew into vigilance. I began checking every door, ensuring all access points were secured. I reviewed camera footage obsessively, noticing how shadows seemed to shift unnaturally in certain hallways, or how a reflection could briefly suggest movement where none existed. Alone, these things might have seemed imagined. With Owen nearby, I couldn't ignore the gnawing suspicion that the quietest person might be hiding the largest secrets. The real alarm came one Wednesday night, just past 3 a.m. I had taken a short bathroom break on the second floor, leaving Owen manning the security room. Returning to the control center, I froze. Owen was sprawled on the floor, unconscious, his radio and keycard clattering beside him. Standing over him were the two men I'd been noting, their expressions sharp, predatory. "Stay back," I yelled instinctively, gripping my flashlight like a weapon. One of them lunged toward me, shoving me hard against the railing. I stumbled, nearly falling down the stairs, adrenaline and fear sharpening every sense. My heart raced, but I forced myself to stay upright, fumbling for my radio. "This is Skyline Security! Help! Code Red!" I shouted, trying not to sound as terrified as I felt. The men hesitated, glancing at each other. Just as one advanced again, the distant wail of a police siren echoed from the street. Their timing was off. Backup had arrived, probably dispatched by my frantic radio call before the attack. The two intruders bolted, leaving Owen groaning on the floor, barely conscious. My hands shook so violently I could barely maintain my grip on the flashlight, but I knelt beside him, checking for injuries. A small cut above his eyebrow and a bruised shoulder, nothing life-threatening, but enough to remind me how close danger had come. The investigation that followed turned everything upside down. Owen, the quiet, competent partner, had been conspiring with the intruders. He had been allowing them into restricted areas, providing schedules, floor plans, and even camera blind spots. The betrayal wasn't just shocking, it was personal. The man I had tentatively trusted, who seemed steady in a world of shadows, had exploited my reliance on him in the cover of night shifts to commit crimes. He was fired immediately and later charged, along with the two accomplices. Seeing him led away in handcuffs, his expression still unreadable, left a hollow ache in me. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was the betrayal itself, the realization that competence and friendliness could mask malice. In the aftermath, I couldn't shake the unease. Patrolling the building alone, I double-checked every door, every lock, every camera feed. Shadows seemed darker, hallways longer, and even the mundane hum of the elevators felt sinister. Every flicker of a monitor, every noise from a distant floor reminded me that danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it walks beside you, silent, unnoticed, until it's too late. I began keeping a journal, documenting every unusual event, every minor discrepancy. Each shift, I mentally rehearsed responses to threats, imagining worst-case scenarios and planning escape routes. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation, a survival instinct sharpened by experience and reinforced by betrayal. I refused to rely on anyone else. Not again. The first few weeks were hard. Anxiety gnawed at me during the night. But I also learned to adapt. I recognized patterns, subtle cues that something was off. The way shadows moved, the timing of distant footsteps, or the unnatural stillness in areas that should have been alive with the sound of machinery. I began trusting myself more than anyone else, realizing that vigilance could be the difference between safety and disaster. I spoke less, observed more, and approached each situation with caution. The building became a test of awareness, patience, and endurance. Every small step I took, from locking doors to checking camera angles twice, became a ritual of survival. Months passed. I had survived the night attacks, but the psychological residue lingered. I sometimes jumped at the echo of a door closing or a shadow passing near a window. The city outside felt safer than the empty halls I patrolled, but the fear had carved a permanent place inside me. I developed habits that seemed excessive to casual observers, always walking with a flashlight, never ignoring a suspicious sound, meticulously logging every unusual occurrence. Friends noticed the change in my demeanor. I smiled less freely, joked less openly, and was always assessing situations in ways I hadn't before. But that vigilance saved me more than once, catching minor security breaches and preventing potential harm. By the time I decided to leave Skyline for a daytime job with more predictable hours, I had learned an invaluable lesson. The building, with its polished lobbies and glass walls, had taught me that danger can lurk behind familiar faces and friendly expressions. Owen's betrayal was a brutal, direct reminder that appearances are never enough to determine trustworthiness. I still patrol occasionally in my mind, replaying the nights when adrenaline was my constant companion. But I know now that awareness, preparation, and intuition are powerful tools. Life doesn't provide warnings, and trust must be earned. I leave behind the dark hallways of Skyline, but the lessons remain. Vigilance isn't paranoia, caution isn't weakness, and survival requires both courage and clear thinking. Trust must be balanced with vigilance. Danger often hides behind familiar faces, and relying solely on appearances can be perilous. Awareness, preparation, and listening to your instincts are essential for safety, especially in environments where the ordinary can conceal extraordinary threats.